The doctor told my children I was already gone, that my mind was a quiet, empty room. It was my own son, Mark, who leaned in close, his breath warm on my cheek as he whispered the coldest words I'd ever heard. "Just pull the plug," he said to his sister, Lisa. They stood there, my two children, deciding my fate as if I were a piece of old furniture. "Friend, before I go on, let me ask you, would you do me a kindness? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me see just how far my story reaches." The beeping of the heart monitor next to me was the only thing that spoke for me, a steady rhythm that proved I was still here. I wanted to scream, to tell that doctor he was wrong, to tell my children that their mother heard every single word. But my body was a prison. I lay there, motionless, as they talked about my funeral, about selling my house in Dayton, about the money. They thought they were whispering in an empty room, but the walls were screaming. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. But in that moment, a fire started in my heart. They thought I was helpless. But what they didn't know was that a mother's will is stronger than any poison. How could I, a prisoner in my own body, ever make them pay? For days, that question haunted me. My new reality was a living nightmare. Mark and Lisa would visit, their faces full of fake sadness. Lisa would hold my hand, her touch feeling like ice. "Oh, Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sorrow. "We miss you so much." All I could do was lie there screaming on the inside. The despair was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother the fire that had just started in my heart. I was their mother, the woman who had rocked them to sleep and healed their scraped knees, and now they looked at me and saw only a roadblock to their inheritance. Then, one afternoon, a new nurse walked in. She was young, with kind, dark eyes. "Hello, Carol," she said softly, her voice different from the others. "My name is Maria." While the other nurses saw a body in a bed, this young woman looked right into my eyes. For just a second, it felt like she wasn't looking at a patient, but at a person. It was a tiny crack of light in my dark world, a flicker of hope that I wasn't entirely alone. She didn't know it, but she was the first person in days to make me feel human. And that, my friend, could change everything. I knew I had to take a chance. I had to reach that young nurse, Maria. My mind raced, searching for a way to break through my silent prison. I couldn't talk, I couldn't write, I couldn't even lift a finger on my own. But I had to try. The next time Maria came to check my pulse, her touch gentle on my wrist, I gathered every ounce of strength I had left in my entire body. I focused on my right hand, on the fingers she was holding, and I pushed. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I felt it, a tiny, faint squeeze. Maria stopped. I saw her eyes widen just a little. She glanced quickly at the closed door, then back at me. She knew. She understood it wasn't just a muscle spasm. She squeezed my hand back, a secret signal just between us. Leaning in, she whispered, "I'll be back tonight when my shift is over." Her words were a promise, a lifeline thrown into the darkness. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I just listened to the beeping of the monitor, waiting for the sound of the soft shoes that promised I wasn't alone anymore. The hospital was quiet that night. The only sounds were the hum of machines and the distant squeak of a cart down the hall. I must have been drifting off when I heard the soft click of my door. It was Maria, my new nurse, just as she had promised. She moved silently to my bedside, her face serious in the dim glow of the monitors. "Carol?" she whispered, leaning in close. "I don't have much time. We need a way to talk." She took my hand in hers. "I'm going to ask you some questions. Squeeze my hand once for yes and 2 times for no. Can you do that?" I summoned all my will and gave her one firm squeeze. A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't alone anymore. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "First, are you in pain?" 2 squeezes. I was not. Are you comfortable? 2 squeezes again. I was not. She paused, her eyes searching mine, and then she asked the question that hung in the air between us. Carol, are you in danger? I squeezed her hand once, with a strength that surprised even me. Maria's face didn't show fear. It showed a quiet, burning anger. All right, Carol, she whispered back. I believe you. Now you tell me where to start. Now that we had a way to talk, my mind, which had been a whirlwind of fear, became sharp and clear. I had to be smart about this. I couldn't just accuse my children, Mark and Lisa. I needed proof. My first instruction to Maria was slow and difficult, spelled out with a painful series of squeezes and her patiently reciting the alphabet. My first target wasn't a person, but a thing. My purse. It was still in the little closet by the door, untouched since the day I arrived. Maria brought it to my bedside, her expression curious. What's in here you need, Carol? She asked gently. I guided her to a stack of mail that she had brought from my house in Columbus a few days earlier. Bills, junk mail, a letter from my church. I had her read the return address on each one. There was the electric bill, the water bill, a catalogue for garden supplies. It all seemed so normal, so boring. I started to lose hope. Then she read an address from a credit union I had never heard of, a place downtown I'd never been to. My heart, which had been beating so steadily on the monitor beside me, suddenly started to race. Maria saw it. What is it, Carol? She whispered. What's this letter? I gave one firm squeeze. Open it. Maria carefully slid her finger under the flap of the envelope and pulled out the statement. Her eyes scanned the page and I saw her face pale in the dim hospital light. Oh, Carol, she breathed out, her voice full of disbelief. This can't be right. She began to read the charges to me in a low whisper. There was a new television worth thousands of dollars. There were dinners at fancy restaurants I had never been to. There were cash withdrawals, hundreds of dollars at a time, from ATMs all over the city. The total balance was over $10,000. My own children, my son Mark and my daughter Lisa, had been on a shopping spree. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were celebrating, using my good name to fund their greedy lives. Every dollar they spent was another nail in my coffin. The cold anger I felt was so intense it almost made me feel strong again. But as Maria kept reading, a bigger, more confusing question popped into my head. How did they do it, Carol? Maria whispered, as if reading my mind. To open an account, they would have needed your signature. The next morning, I made my first move. There would be no shouting, no accusations. Not yet. My grief was now a cloak, and I wore it perfectly. I called my son Mark, and when he answered, I let my voice crack and tremble. I told him the garbage truck had come. I told him the painting, his father's painting, was gone forever. I cried, making sure he could hear the sound of a heartbroken old woman on the other end of the line. He was quiet for a moment, and then he let out a heavy, impatient sigh. Mum, it was just an old painting, he said, his voice laced with the kind of strained patience one uses for a child. Listen, Jessica bought you a beautiful new print of a beach to put there. You'll love it. It's much more cheerful. Cheerful. He thought a cheap print could replace a memory that had warmed our home for 40 years. I played my part. I thanked him through my fake tears and told him he was a good son. He hung up, probably feeling relieved that he had handled his hysterical old mother so well. He had no idea he wasn't talking to a victim anymore. He was talking to a hunter, and I was just beginning to learn the scent of my prey. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My anger was a fire, but I needed a weapon, and that weapon was knowledge. I went through Richard's old Rolodex, the one Jessica had almost thrown out, and my fingers stopped on a name. Arthur Davies, Fine Art Appraisals. Richard had spoken to him once, years ago. My heart pounded as I dialed the number, feeling like a spy in my own life, a stranger to the woman I used to be. I explained the situation to Mr. Davies, keeping my voice low and steady. I told him I had the authentication papers for a long-lost painting, but that the artwork itself had been accidentally discarded. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice suddenly grave and urgent. "Do you understand what you're telling me? If those papers are real, that painting isn't just valuable, it's a piece of history." He told me to bring the documents to his office immediately, but then he gave me a warning that sent a chill down my spine. "Do not speak to anyone else about this," he commanded. "A piece like that being in the wild is a dangerous thing. There are people who would do anything to get their hands on it." Suddenly the stakes were higher than I ever could have imagined. My son Mark came over that evening, holding a large rectangular object wrapped in brown paper. He tore it open with a flourish, revealing a cheap, generic print of a lighthouse. "See, Mum? A fresh new look," he said, his smile so forced it looked painful. I looked into my son's eyes, the same eyes I had adored since he was a baby, and I searched for any sign of remorse. I found nothing but emptiness. I decided to set my first trap. "Mark," I said softly, my voice still watery with pretend grief. "I know Jessica planned all this, but when did you two actually decide to do it? It all felt so sudden." I watched him closely, watching the way his eyes darted away from mine, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Oh, you know Jessica," he stammered, running a hand through his hair. "She gets an idea in her head, and it just sort of happens. It was all very last minute, Mum. A spur-of-the-moment thing." He was lying. A terrible, clumsy lie. And in that moment, listening to him defend his wife's cruelty, the last flicker of hope I had for my son died. He wasn't just a bystander in this crime. He was a conspirator, and I knew exactly how I was going to prove it. I squeezed Maria's hand, directing her gaze away from the signature and up toward the top of the form. She squinted in the dim light, her finger tracing the printed boxes. "Date of application," she whispered, reading the text aloud. Her voice faltered as she read the date that was neatly written in blue ink. "Carol," she said, looking from the paper to my face, her eyes wide with confusion. "This says the card was applied for on May 12th. That's a full 2 weeks before you were admitted to the hospital." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. 2 weeks before. It wasn't like they saw me get sick and took advantage of the situation. This was planned. My mind flashed back to the weeks before my collapse. I remembered the strange, bitter taste in the iced tea Lisa insisted on making me every afternoon. I remembered feeling so tired, so dizzy, telling my doctor I felt like I was walking through a fog. And then, the final wave of sickness that sent me here. It all clicked into place, a series of horrible puzzle pieces. My illness hadn't been an accident. It was the first step in their plan. "Carol, what are you saying?" Maria's whisper was shaky, her face pale. "Are you saying that they made you sick?" I gave her one long, deliberate squeeze. Yes. The truth was out now, a poison of its own, filling the sterile air of the hospital room. My son, Mark, and my daughter Lisa hadn't just betrayed me. They had tried to murder me. They had smiled to my face while slowly, patiently, poisoning me. Every kind word, every offer to help, every "you should rest, Mom," was a lie designed to cover their tracks. The sickness was a lie. My confusion, my weakness, my collapse, it was all part of their twisted, greedy plan to get their hands on my money. They needed me helpless. They needed me silent. And they had almost succeeded. Maria sank into the visitor's chair, her hands covering her mouth. We sat there in silence for a long time, the only sound that steady, rhythmic beep of my heart. The heart they had tried so hard to stop. We weren't just fighting a financial battle anymore. We were fighting for my life, against the 2 people I had brought into this world. And knowing the truth in my heart was one thing. But how in the world could we ever prove it? We needed proof. A suspicion, no matter how strong, wouldn't be enough to fight my own children. That night, I gave Maria, my brave young nurse, her most dangerous mission yet. Using our painstaking alphabet system, I spelled out my instructions. First, Kitchen. I needed her to look in the tea cabinet, deep in the back, behind the other boxes. Was there a different kind of tea I didn't recognize? Then, I gave her the second location. Medicinecabinet. Look behind everything. Look for something that doesn't belong. She understood immediately. I'll go tomorrow morning, she said, her voice low but firm. I'll tell them you asked me to get your photo albums from the den. The next day was the longest of my life. I had to watch Lisa fluff my pillows and tell me she loved me, all while knowing she had poisoned me. I felt like a coiled snake, waiting to strike. That evening, Maria came for her shift. She said nothing, but her eyes were dark with purpose. She waited until she was alone with me, then she pulled out her phone. She had taken a picture. There, in the back of my medicine cabinet in my little brick house, hidden behind a bottle of old aspirin, was a small, unlabelled bottle filled with a clear, oily liquid. My eyes were locked on the phone screen, on that picture of the little glass bottle. It was real. I wasn't crazy. This was the proof, the key to everything. Seeing it there, so small and innocent-looking, filled me with a cold, hard fury. That little bottle was supposed to be my silent death sentence, but now it was going to be my weapon. Maria, my brave nurse, looked from the phone to my face. "What is in it, Carol?" she whispered. "And how in the world do we get it out of your house without your daughter Lisa noticing it's gone?" That was the problem. If the bottle simply disappeared, Lisa might get spooked. She might realize someone was onto her plan and get rid of any other evidence. We couldn't just take it, we had to replace it. Using our slow but steady language of squeezes, I gave Maria a new, even more dangerous task. She had to find a similar bottle, fill it with plain water and swap it out. She was putting her whole career, maybe even her safety, on the line for me, a woman she barely knew. I watched her face, expecting to see fear, but instead I saw determination. "I'll do it tonight after my shift," she said, her voice not even trembling. "Pray she doesn't decide to clean out the medicine cabinet before I get there." The next morning, Maria came in and gave me a single, almost invisible nod. The swap was done. She had the real bottle, the one with the clear, oily liquid tucked away safely in her locker. We now had the evidence, but we were in over our heads. We were a sick old woman and a young nurse against my two clever, cruel children who had already tried to kill me once. We couldn't go to the police, not yet. They would question me, and I still couldn't speak. They might think Maria was a crazy person, or worse, that she was trying to hurt me. We needed someone powerful, someone who knew the law, and someone who would believe us without question. There was only one person. David. I spelled out the name for Maria, my hand squeezing hers with a desperate urgency. David had been my husband's best friend since they were boys. He was our family lawyer, a sharp, honest man who had handled our affairs for 40 years. He had held my hand at my husband's funeral and promised he'd always look out for me. If anyone would fight for me, it was David. I had her write down his name and office number on a slip of paper. She tucked it deep into her pocket. Now, she just had to make a phone call that could either save my life or expose our entire plan. Maria waited until her lunch break, stepping out into the hospital's small garden for privacy. She told me later that her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe as she dialed David's number. His secretary answered first, a firm, professional voice. Maria had to be convincing. "My name is Maria," she said, her voice steady. "I'm a nurse caring for Carol Harris. It's a matter of her personal safety. I need to speak with him urgently." After a long, tense pause, David's deep, familiar voice came on the line. "This is David. You're calling about Carol?" He was skeptical, of course. Why was a nurse calling him and not her children? Maria chose her words carefully. "Sir, I can't speak freely on the phone, but I have something for you. Physical evidence concerning her well-being. You need to see it." David was silent for a moment. He was no fool. He knew something was very wrong. "All right," he said finally. "There's a little coffee shop called the Daily Grind on Elm Street, way on the other side of town. Be there tomorrow at noon. Come alone." Maria agreed, her hands shaking as she hung up. The meeting was set. She was going to walk in there with a little glass bottle in her purse and a story so unbelievable it could either save me or destroy us both. Maria told me everything about her meeting with David later that night. She walked into that little coffee shop, the Daily Grind, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw him immediately, a tall, serious man in a dark suit, looking exactly like the lawyer he was. He watched her with sharp, skeptical eyes as she sat down. "You have 5 minutes," he said, his voice clipped and professional. Maria took a deep breath and began to talk. She told him about my whisper, about our secret language of squeezes, about the credit card statement, and the date on the application. David listened without a single change in his expression. Then Maria reached into her purse and slid the small, unlabelled bottle across the table. "And this," she said quietly. "We found this hidden in her medicine cabinet." David looked down at the little bottle as if it were a rattlesnake. He stared at it for a long, silent minute. Maria said she saw his knuckles turn white as he clenched his fists under the table. When he finally looked up, his professional mask was gone. His face was a picture of pure, cold fury. "Those monsters," he growled, his voice a low rumble of rage. "They will not get away with this. I swear on your husband's memory, Carol, I will bring them down." In that moment, our little team of 2 became an army. David was a man of action, but he was also a man of strategy. He explained his plan to Maria, who relayed it all back to me. "We can't just storm in and accuse them," he had told her. "They'll deny everything, destroy any other evidence, and paint you as a crazy nurse who is trying to take advantage of a sick old woman." He was right. My children, Mark and Lisa, would play the victims perfectly. So David's first move was a quiet one. He wouldn't freeze my bank accounts. That would be like a loud alarm bell, warning them that someone was onto them. Instead, he placed a special kind of alert on everything I owned. Every time a check was cashed, a card was used, or a single dollar was moved, he would get a silent notification. "We give them enough rope, Maria, and they'll tie their own noose," he had said. So that's what we did. We watched. From my hospital bed, I became a silent general, and every evening, Maria would bring me the report from David. Another $1,000 spent on a shopping spree for Lisa. Another withdrawal from an ATM near a fancy restaurant for Mark. Every dollar they stole was another bar in the prison cell David was building for them. But oh, my friend, having to lie there and let it happen was the hardest part. While David was building his case, my daughter Lisa was busy building hers. She came to visit me alone one afternoon, pulling a chair right up to my bedside. She thought I was still lost in a fog, a body with no mind. She took my hand and her touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. She started to cry, her sobs sounding fake and hollow in the quiet room. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm so worried about Mark. He's just not handling this well at all. He keeps talking about money and the house. I think he's in some kind of trouble." I lay there, my eyes closed, listening to my own daughter try to pin her terrible crimes on her brother. She was setting the stage, painting herself as the sweet, caring daughter who was being dragged down by her greedy, impulsive brother. It was a masterful performance. She would sigh and say, "I keep telling him, Mark, this isn't what Mum would want," but he just won't listen. She was trying to plant a story, a lie that she could use later to save herself. And as I listened to her spin that poisonous web, I realised a terrifying truth. Mark might have been the one to whisper the words, but Lisa was the one who had written the script. Lying there, listening to my daughter Lisa's performance, I knew I couldn't just be a passive victim anymore. I had to fight back, but with what? I had no voice, no strength. All I had was my mind, and a tiny, almost useless ability to squeeze my hand. So I decided to use it. The next day, Mark and Lisa came to visit together. They stood on either side of my bed, playing their parts. Lisa picked up my left hand, stroking it gently. "We're here, Mum," she said, her voice full of that fake, sweet concern. I left my hand completely limp in hers, a dead weight. Then my son Mark, on my other side, picked up my right hand. He was rougher, less patient. "Hi, Mum," he mumbled, just going through the motions. That's when I did it. I gave his hand the faintest, barest squeeze I could manage. Mark froze. "Whoa," he said, his eyes wide. "Did you feel that?" "Lisa, she squeezed my hand." Lisa shot a sharp look from my face to his. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark," she snapped, her voice losing its sweetness for a second. "It's a muscle spasm. The doctor said to expect it." Mark looked less sure, a flicker of something, hope, confusion, on his face. But my daughter's cold glare put the thought to rest. I had planted a tiny seed of chaos, a secret just between me and my son. That little squeeze did more than I could have hoped for. It unsettled Lisa. She became sharper, more controlling. A few days later, my nurse Maria was walking down the hall when she saw Lisa standing near the nurse's station, her back to my room, talking on her cell phone. Maria slowed down, pretending to check a chart on the wall. She could hear Lisa's voice, and it wasn't the soft, gentle voice she used with me. It was a harsh, angry hiss. "No, you stick to the plan," Lisa whispered furiously into the phone. It was clear she was talking to her brother Mark. "I don't care if you think she squeezed your hand," Lisa went on, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're being emotional. I have the doctor handled. You just need to keep playing the sad, devoted son and don't mess this up." Maria said she just stood there, frozen, as Lisa clicked her phone off and pasted a sweet smile back on her face before walking back into my room. When Maria came in later that night, she told me every word. Not only was Lisa the one in charge, but her web was wider than I knew. What did she mean she had the doctor handled? Hearing what Lisa said on the phone, everything finally clicked into its terrible place. It was a formal declaration of what my heart had already started to suspect. This whole nightmare, from the poison in my tea to the whisper by my bedside, had been orchestrated by one person, my daughter. My son Mark, with his quick temper and careless greed, was just a pawn in her game. He was the hand that did the work, but she was the cold, calculating mind that drew up the plans. It was the second great twist of my story, a betrayal so deep it almost broke me. I thought back to their childhood. Lisa was always the smart one, the one who could wrap her father around her little finger. She was the one who comforted Mark when he got in trouble, all while quietly telling him how to avoid getting caught next time. She hadn't changed at all. "She's the real danger," Maria whispered, her eyes dark with worry. "Mark is a storm, but Lisa is like a quiet poison." I knew she was right. My battle wasn't against my foolish, greedy son. It was a battle of wits against my own brilliant, cold-hearted daughter, and she had no idea her mother was finally ready to play the game. Knowing my daughter Lisa was my true enemy gave me a strength I didn't know I had. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. It was time to stop being a victim and start being a fighter. The first step in my war was to begin my miraculous recovery. My lawyer, David, had brought in a new doctor, a man he trusted completely, who was now in on our secret. Following his instructions, I began the show. It started with a flicker of my eyelids when Lisa was in the room. Then a few days later, a deliberate twitch of my finger when my son, Mark, was complaining about a bill. They both saw it. Mark jumped, his eyes wide. "Lisa, look! Her fingers, they moved!" he shouted, a strange mix of shock and maybe even hope in his voice. But Lisa, my clever Lisa, was much calmer. She never took her eyes off my face, searching for a sign that I was aware. "The doctor said this might happen, Mark," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "It's just nerves firing, it doesn't mean anything." But it meant everything. They thought they were watching a body slowly waking up from a long sleep. What they were really watching was a hunter setting a trap, and my next move was going to be one they could not ignore. The small movements continued for another week. I could see my children getting used to them, dismissing them just as Lisa had coached them to. They were getting comfortable again, which was exactly what I wanted. The time had come to truly rattle their cage. Lisa was visiting alone, sitting by my bed and flipping through a magazine, sighing loudly about how much her new curtains were going to cost. She was so absorbed in her own greed that she barely looked at me. I gathered all my strength, focused on my throat, on the muscles that had been silent for so long. It felt like trying to lift a car. I pushed, and a dry, raspy sound came out. "Water," I croaked. The sound was quiet, ugly, but it cut through the silence of the room like a gunshot. Lisa froze completely. The magazine slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stared at me, her face a mask of pure, horrified shock. This wasn't the face of a loving daughter overjoyed to hear her mother's voice. It was the face of a killer watching her victim rise from the grave. She just stood there, her mouth open, the blood draining from her face. My children now had a new problem. They couldn't pull the plug on a mother who was starting to talk. My recovery, now that it had started, had to look real. David's doctor made a formal visit with both Mark and Lisa present. It was all part of the show. The doctor, a kind-looking man with grey hair, sat beside me and asked me simple questions. "Carol, can you tell me your name?" he asked, shining a small light in my eyes. "Carol Harris," I whispered, my voice still scratchy. "And your late husband's name?" "John," I said. My children were watching my every move, their faces tense. Then the doctor asked, "Carol, do you know what month it is?" I looked at him, my face a perfect mask of confusion. "It's March, isn't it?" It was late May. "And do you remember how you got here, to the hospital?" I shook my head slowly, letting a look of fear cross my face, and I don't remember. The doctor turned to Mark and Lisa with a serious expression. "It's quite common," he said, "severe memory loss surrounding the event. Her long-term memory is intact, but the last few months are a complete blank. They may never come back." I could see the relief wash over Lisa's face like a wave. She thought she was safe. She thought my memory was gone forever, and she had no idea that I was now a spy in my own life. With my memory supposedly gone, the doctors had no reason to keep me in the hospital. The day they discharged me felt like a strange dream. My children, Mark and Lisa, played their parts perfectly. They fussed over me, making sure I was comfortable in the back of the car for the ride back to my quiet tree-lined street in Columbus. Lisa, my daughter the mastermind, squeezed my hand. "We're so happy to have you back, Mum," she said, her voice dripping with fake emotion. "I'm going to move in for a little while just to help you get back on your feet." She was volunteering to be my caregiver. The fox was putting herself in charge of the hen house. As we pulled into my driveway, a wave of sadness washed over me. This was my home, the place I had filled with love and laughter. Now it felt like a battlefield. They wheeled me through the front door, past the photos on the wall of them as happy, smiling children. They saw a weak, confused old woman who was now their burden. I saw two criminals who had just unknowingly welcomed their judge and jury through the front door. The game had moved to a new field, and I was on their territory now. But they had one very big disadvantage. They had no idea they were even in a fight. My new life was a performance. During the day, I would sit in my wheelchair in the living room, a soft blanket over my lap, pretending to watch television or doze off. In reality, I was listening. My ears were sharper than they had ever been, and the kitchen was just a few feet away. My children thought I was a harmless piece of furniture. They spoke freely, their voices low but clear. "The bank called again about that loan," I heard Mark complain one morning. "They said we're behind." Lisa's reply was a furious whisper. "I told you to handle that. We can't let anything look strange. We need to get power of attorney and fast before she gets any funny ideas." Mark's voice was whiny. What if that doctor is wrong? What if she starts remembering things? She won't, Lisa snapped back, her voice like ice. And even if she does, who would believe her? By then, we'll have legal control of everything. Just stick to the plan. Power of attorney. Those 2 words sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. They were getting impatient. They were making a legal move to take everything from me, and they were doing it soon. I was no longer just fighting for justice. I was in a race against time. I sat there, my mind racing, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounding like a bomb counting down. How could I fight them? I needed a weapon, something they didn't know about. My eyes drifted around the familiar room and settled on the doorway to my late husband's study. On the far wall was a large, beautiful painting of a field of sunflowers he had bought me for our anniversary years ago. And suddenly, a memory hit me, so clear and sharp it was like he was standing right there beside me. It was the day he hung that painting. He had winked at me, his eyes twinkling. "This is for the important things, Carol," he had said, tapping the wall behind the canvas. "The things only you and I should know about." A safe. My husband, John, had installed a small wall safe and hidden it behind that painting. My children had never known. My heart started to beat faster. It was a secret, a variable they hadn't planned for. But it was in the study, a whole room away. How could I, the helpless old woman in the wheelchair, possibly get to it without my daughter, my warden, seeing my every move? My chance came 3 nights later. My daughter Lisa, so confident that I was a helpless vegetable, decided she needed a break. "I'm going out with some friends, Mom," she announced, patting my shoulder as I sat in my wheelchair. "Mark will be here in an hour to check on you, but you'll be fast asleep by then, won't you?" I gave her a slow, sleepy blink. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, my heart began to pound. This was it. I gripped the arms of my wheelchair, my knuckles white. Pushing myself up was agony. My legs, weak from months of disuse, trembled like newborn foals. Every muscle screamed in protest. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out in pain. Leaning on furniture, I shuffled my way across the living room floor, each step a marathon. The grandfather clock seemed to tick louder with every move, counting the seconds until Mark arrived. When I finally reached the study, I was drenched in sweat. My hands shook as I lifted the heavy sunflower painting off its hook and set it on the floor. There it was. The small steel door of the safe. My fingers trembled as I reached for the dial. But just as I touched the cold metal, I heard it. The sound of headlights sweeping across the front window and the crunch of tires on the driveway. Panic seized me. My mind screamed, "It's Mark! He's early!" But the car kept going, its red taillights disappearing down the street. It was just a neighbour. I let out a breath I didn't realise I was holding, my body slumping against the wall in relief. My hands were still shaking, but now with adrenaline instead of fear. I turned back to the safe and carefully began to turn the dial. Left, right, left. Our wedding anniversary. A soft click echoed in the silent room, and the small steel door swung open. I peered inside, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. I expected to see stacks of cash, or maybe the jewellery my husband John had given me, but it was nearly empty. All that was inside was a single, thick, cream-coloured envelope. My name, Carol, was written across the front in my husband's familiar, steady handwriting. Seeing it felt like a punch to the gut. It was like he was reaching out to me from beyond the grave. I gently lifted it out, my fingers tracing his name. This wasn't just a discovery. It felt like a message. A final piece of guidance from the man I loved. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and pulled out a folded letter. "My dearest Carol," it began, "I pray you never have to read this, but if you are, it means I was right to be worried." Tucked inside the letter was a thick, folded legal document. My eyes scanned John's words. He wrote about his love for me and his pride in our children, Mark and Lisa, but he also wrote about a worry, a seed of entitlement he saw growing in them years ago that had deeply troubled him. "I always hoped they would outgrow it," he wrote, but I felt I had to put a fail-safe in place just in case. Something to protect you, and to protect the legacy we built together. My hands shook as I unfolded the document. It was a will, a second, final will and testament, signed and notarized just 1 year before he passed away. It was all there in black and white, official and legally binding. It revoked all previous versions. My husband, my wise and careful John, had seen the darkness in our children that I had been blind to for years. He had created a secret plan to protect me from them. As I scanned the legal text, I saw the key passages, the ones that changed everything, the ones that gave me, his executor, an incredible amount of power. The will my children were counting on was now just a worthless piece of paper. My husband had left me one final gift, a weapon, and I finally knew exactly how I was going to win this war. I sat there on the floor of the study, the secret will in my hands, and read the key paragraph over and over again. My husband John, my brilliant, loving husband, had done something I'd never seen in a legal document. David, my lawyer, would later call it the character clause. It was simple, but it was genius. It stated that before my children, Mark and Lisa, could inherit a single penny of his estate, I, as the executor, had to publicly stand before our community and personally vouch for their moral character and integrity. If I could not or would not do so, the will dictated that they would be disinherited completely. Every last dollar would instead go to a local children's charity. It wasn't just a will. It was a test, a final exam for his children, and I was the one who held the gradebook. He had given me all the power, trusting my judgment to protect the family legacy he had worked so hard to build. He had seen their greed as a sickness, and he had left me the cure. My children thought they were going to get everything by proving I was weak, but my husband had created a way for me to win by proving they were wicked. Now I understood. He had given me a sword, but I couldn't just use it in a dusty lawyer's office. A clause like this, a public judgment of character, needed a stage. It needed an audience. For the next 2 days, I sat in my wheelchair, a plan forming in my mind. I needed a stage, but how could I build one that my greedy children would willingly climb onto? The answer had to appeal to the 2 things they loved most: money and looking important. That's when the idea hit me, so perfect and so devious that I almost smiled. A charity, a family foundation. It was the perfect cover. It would make them look like wonderful, caring children in our Ohio town, all while giving them control over a huge pot of money. That night, using a small prepaid cell phone that Maria, my nurse, had snuck in for me, I made a call. David, my lawyer, answered on the first ring. "Carol, is everything all right?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Everything is perfect, David," I whispered, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I have the weapon my husband left for me, and now I have a plan to use it. We're going to start a foundation, the Harris Family Foundation, and David, we're going to throw a party." The trap was designed. It was a beautiful, elegant trap, baited with praise and cash. Now, all I had to do was invite the rats to the feast. The next morning, I asked Lisa to call her brother Mark over for a family meeting. They both came into the living room, their faces cautious, probably expecting me to complain about something. I stayed in my role, the frail, forgetful old woman. "Children," I began, my voice soft and weak. "I've been doing so much thinking lately, about your father, and about our family's legacy." They exchanged a nervous glance. "I want to do something good with his money," I continued. "I want to start a foundation, the Harris Family Foundation, to help the community, and I want the 2 of you to be the co-chairs." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the greedy calculations spinning in their eyes. A foundation meant prestige, power, and a very comfortable salary. It was everything they wanted, handed to them on a silver platter. My daughter Lisa was the first to find her voice. "Mom," she said, her voice practically trembling with fake emotion. "That is the most wonderful idea I have ever heard." Mark was nodding eagerly, a wide, greedy smile spreading across his face. They took the bait. They didn't just nibble on it, they swallowed it whole, hook, line, and sinker. They had absolutely no idea they had just agreed to star in their own public execution. I had expected my children, Mark and Lisa, to be happy about the foundation, but I had underestimated the depth of their ego. They didn't want a simple charity, they wanted a monument to themselves. The planning started immediately, and it was bigger and flashier than I could have ever imagined. From my wheelchair I listened as they sat at my dining room table, their voices buzzing with excitement. "We have to book the grand ballroom at the Sinclair Hotel downtown," Lisa said, already scrolling through venues on her laptop. "It's the nicest place in the city. We have to make a splash." My son Mark was nodding along eagerly. "We should get the local news to cover it. Maybe Channel 5. I know a guy who works there. We can make this the biggest society event of the year." They talked about inviting the mayor, the city council, every wealthy business owner in this part of Ohio. They wanted a red carpet. They wanted a string quartet. They weren't just building a stage for my announcement. They were building a throne room for themselves. And I just sat there, nodding and smiling, the frail old mother so proud of her ambitious children. The invitations went out the next week, thick cream-coloured cards with gold writing. There was no turning back now for them or for me. My daughter Lisa took charge of the party planning with a terrifying energy. She was born for this role. She was on the phone from morning until night, her voice a syrupy sweet melody as she charmed florists and caterers. "Oh, that sounds wonderful," she'd coo into her phone. "We want everything to be perfect. It's all to honour my mother, you know." Then she'd hang up, turn to her brother Mark, and her voice would turn to steel. "Did you call the bank about that transfer? Don't you dare mess this up." She was a perfect actress, switching between her two faces without ever missing a beat. She became so obsessed with the party, so focused on her future glory, that she started to get careless. I was no longer a person to her, I was a prop, the guest of honour who just needed to be wheeled out at the right moment. She would leave her financial papers on the coffee table. She would talk openly with Mark about their plans right in front of me, completely convinced my mind was a blank slate. She was so sure she had already won the war that she never bothered to check for spies in her own camp. And that, my friend, was the biggest mistake she ever made. Lisa's obsession with the party was the opening we needed. With her out of the house for hours at a time, meeting with vendors and touring the ballroom, we put the next phase of David's plan into action. My lawyer David called her himself, his voice full of fatherly concern. "Lisa," he said, "with this big public event and all the attention it will bring, I'm a little concerned about your mother's security at the house." I could just imagine Lisa preening on the other end of the line, enjoying the feeling of being so important. "I've taken the liberty of hiring a top-of-the-line security firm to install a few new cameras and alarms," David continued smoothly. "Just to be safe. They can come by tomorrow morning. You don't even need to be there." Lisa agreed without a moment's hesitation. The next day, 2 men in professional uniforms arrived. They weren't security installers. They were private investigators hired by David. In less than an hour, they had installed tiny invisible microphones and cameras in the kitchen, the living room and the study. My home was now a spider's web. The stage was set, the cameras were rolling. All we needed now was for my children to walk in and confess. We didn't have to wait long. A few nights before the big party, my children were in the kitchen, toasting their success with a bottle of my late husband's expensive wine. They thought I was asleep in my wheelchair in the living room. They were loud, arrogant, and so very sure they had won. But this time, David's tiny invisible ears were listening to every single word. "I still can't believe it," my son Mark said, his voice giddy. "In just 2 days, we'll be the heads of the Harris Foundation. We'll be set for life." My daughter Lisa laughed, a sound that was sharp and ugly. "I told you it would work," she said, her voice dripping with pride. You just had to be patient." Then came the words that sealed their fate, the confession I had been praying for. "That stuff I got online was perfect," Lisa bragged. "She was a complete vegetable. There was no way she could tell anyone what was happening. We just had to play our parts." David had the crystal clear recording within the hour. It was over. There were no more shadows to hide in, no more lies they could tell. I had their own voices, their own words, and I was going to play them for the entire world to hear. The night before the party, the house was quiet. The trap was set, the evidence was secure. My victory was just hours away. But instead of feeling strong, I just felt tired. I sat in my wheelchair in the darkened living room and watched my children. They were on the floor, surrounded by old photo albums, picking out pictures for a slideshow for the event. And then, something happened I wasn't prepared for. They found a picture of a family vacation we took to Florida when they were little. Mark was burying Lisa in the sand, and they were both laughing, their faces bright with pure, childish joy. They started laughing now, a real, genuine laugh. "I remember that," Mark said. "You were so mad when I got sand in your hair." Lisa was smiling a real smile, not her usual fake, sharp one. "You were such a pest," she said, but her voice was warm. For a moment they weren't monsters. They were just my children, my little boy and girl. And my heart ached. A terrible question echoed in my mind. Could I really stand up in front of hundreds of people and completely destroy them? Was this justice? Or was it just the final, heartbreaking act of a family that had already fallen apart? My resolve was wavering. The anger that had fueled me for weeks was gone, replaced by a mother's deep, painful grief. That night, long after my children were asleep, I wheeled myself slowly and silently into the study. I opened the safe and took out the letter from my husband, John. My hands trembled as I unfolded the familiar pages. I needed to hear his voice, to feel his strength one more time. I read the words he had written all those years ago, and one sentence stood out as if he had whispered it right in my ear. "My dearest Carol," he wrote. "If you are reading this, it means our children have chosen greed over love. Do not mistake your strength for cruelty. Our legacy is built on honesty and hard work. You are the guardian of that legacy now. You must protect it, no matter how hard it is." I folded the letter, the paper cool against my fingers. The sadness in my heart was still there, but the doubt was gone. This was not about revenge. This was about honor. This was a promise I had made to the man I loved. My husband had seen the truth, and now, so did I. The show would go on. The morning of the party, with my dress laid out and the whole plan in motion, we got a surprise. My lawyer, David, received a phone call from a blocked number. He answered, and a man's nervous voice on the other end asked, "Is this David Mills, the lawyer for Carol Harris?" It was Dr. Evans, the very first doctor who had treated me, the one who had looked my children in the eye and declared my case completely hopeless. David told me later that the man sounded like he was on the verge of tears. "I can't live with it anymore," the doctor confessed, his voice cracking. "What I did, what I said about her condition, it wasn't the whole truth. I was pressured." David, ever the calm lawyer, simply listened. After a long, rambling confession, the doctor said he was ready to tell the truth no matter what it cost him. "I need to make it right," he said. David told him about the foundation launch party that evening. "If you are serious about making it right, Doctor," David said, his voice firm, "be at the Sinclair Hotel at 8 o'clock tonight, and be ready to speak." We had no idea if he would actually have the courage to show up. A few hours later, David called me back. He had spoken to Dr. Evans again and gotten the whole ugly story. It was the fourth great twist in my sad tale, and it was the one that showed me the true depth of my daughter Lisa's evil. Dr. Evans hadn't just been careless or lazy, he had been blackmailed. Years ago, a minor malpractice claim against him had been settled and the record was sealed. But Lisa, who had worked as a paralegal for a summer, had the skills to dig up old secrets. She found it. She had gone to that doctor with a choice. Either he managed my case, making sure I never recovered and was declared hopeless, or she would leak the old story to the newspapers and destroy his career. He told me she was absolutely ruthless, David said, his voice quiet with shock. She had him trapped and she knew it. My daughter hadn't just found a weak doctor. She had found a good man's one mistake and had used it to crush him, turning him into a weapon to use against his own mother. The cruelty of it took my breath away, and it erased every last flicker of doubt I had left. That evening, the grand ballroom of the Sinclair Hotel was sparkling. Giant crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, a string quartet was playing softly in the corner, and hundreds of the most important people in our town milled about, drinking champagne. It was a perfect picture of high society. My children, Mark and Lisa, stood at the entrance glowing. They looked like the perfect devoted children, accepting praise for their wonderful new foundation. "You look beautiful, Mum," Lisa whispered, adjusting the blanket on my lap as she wheeled my chair to the main table. I smiled weakly, playing my part. I could see David across the room, giving me a small, steady nod. A little later, I saw Maria, my brave nurse, slip into a seat in the back, her face full of hope. The mayor got up and gave a speech praising my children's generosity. A banker went up and talked about their commitment to the community. The applause was deafening. Then, the host for the evening walked to the microphone. "And now," he said, his voice booming, "it is my great honour to introduce the woman who made this all possible, the wonderful Carol Harris." Lisa smiled her brightest, fakest smile and began to wheel my chair toward the stage. This was it. The show was about to begin. The spotlight was warm on my face. My daughter Lisa wheeled me to the centre of the stage and placed a microphone in my lap, along with a stack of neatly written cue cards. She leaned in close, her smile as bright as a searchlight. "Just read the cards, Mum," she whispered. "You'll be great." I looked down at the cards, at the pretty, harmless speech she had written for me. Then I looked out at the sea of faces, all watching me, expecting a sweet story from a frail old woman. I took the microphone and with a steady hand I pushed the cue cards off my lap. They fluttered to the stage floor. A small gasp went through the crowd. On the side of the stage I saw Lisa's smile falter. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice clear and stronger than it had been in months. "We are here tonight to talk about family and about legacy." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "My husband John always said, 'The truth, Carol, always has a way of coming to the light.' So tonight, in front of all of you, I've decided it's time to finally turn on the lights." I gave a small nod to a man in the back of the room, one of David's men, and the large screen behind me flickered to life. Everyone in that grand ballroom turned to look at the screen, expecting to see a happy family photo. My son Mark and daughter Lisa were smiling, ready to accept the applause. But no photo appeared. Instead, the screen was filled with a stark black and white image of a legal document. It was the fraudulent credit card application. A confused murmur spread through the room like a wave. People squinted, trying to read the text, their polite smiles turning into frowns of confusion. On stage with me, the change was instant. Lisa's perfect smile dissolved, her face turning a pale, waxy colour. Mark looked from the screen to me and then back again, his mouth hanging open in pure, horrified recognition. The room grew quiet. All you could hear was the faint clinking of ice in glasses. The string quartet had stopped playing. Every single eye was on us. I lifted the microphone again, my hand perfectly steady. "I know this isn't what you were expecting," I said, my voice calm and clear, echoing through the silent room. "You see, our story tonight doesn't begin with a happy memory. It begins with this document. It begins with a crime. It begins with a forgery of my signature." I gave the man in the back another signal. The image on the screen zoomed in, focusing on the clumsy fake signature. While I was lying helpless in a hospital bed, I continued, speaking directly to the crowd, my children, the two people you have been honouring tonight, were quite busy. They used this illegally obtained credit card to fund a lifestyle I never gave them. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, turning into gasps of shock. People were turning in their seats to stare openly at Mark and Lisa, who were trapped on the stage with me, their faces frozen in a state of panic. There were shopping sprees at the nicest stores in Columbus, I said, my voice never wavering. There were expensive dinners, cash withdrawals, even a down payment on a vacation. Lisa finally found her voice. She stepped forward, trying to grab the microphone. "Mum, you're confused," she said, her voice a high-pitched squeak. "Your memory. You know it's not right." But the microphone in my hand was the only one that was working. David had made sure of that. I looked at her, my daughter, my tormentor, and then I turned back to the audience. But this, my friends, this theft of a few $1,000s, that was the least of their crimes. I let the silence hang in the room for a long moment, my gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of my friends and neighbours. Then I looked at my children, my son Mark and my daughter Lisa, who were staring at me in pure terror. "You see?" I said into the microphone. "My children were worried that my recovery was taking too long. They were impatient." I gave another nod to the man at the soundboard. The big screen behind me went black. Then a voice filled the room. It was Mark's voice, giddy and drunk on wine. "I still can't believe it," his voice echoed through the ballroom. "In just 2 days, we'll be the heads of the Harris Foundation. We'll be set for life." Then came my daughter's voice, sharp and cold as ice. "I told you it would work," Lisa's recorded voice bragged. "You just had to be patient." And then came the final, terrible words. "That stuff I got online was perfect. She was a complete vegetable. There was no way she could tell anyone what was happening." A collective gasp of true horror went through the crowd. It was a confession to attempted murder in their own voices for everyone to hear. Lisa's face crumpled, the mask of the perfect daughter shattering into a million pieces. The recording ended, and the only sound in the entire ballroom was my own steady breathing. Into that dead, horrified silence, I spoke again. "My husband was a very wise man," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I hadn't felt in years. "He saw the seeds of this greed in his children long ago, and he put a plan in place to protect our family's legacy." The screen behind me changed, now showing a high-resolution image of my husband John's secret, second will. I pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "He called it a character clause," I explained. "It says that before my children can inherit a single dollar, I, as the executor, must stand up in public and vouch for their moral character." I paused, looking from the will to the faces of my children, and then out to the audience. "So, as the will legally requires me to do, in front of all of you as my witnesses, I will now make my official declaration." I took a deep breath. I cannot, and I will not, vouch for the character of these two people. The finality of the words hit the room like a thunderclap. As of this moment, my son Mark and my daughter Lisa are completely and legally disinherited. But our story tonight, my friends, is still not quite over. There is one more person who needs to speak. As Mark and Lisa stood there, broken and exposed, a man began to walk toward the stage from the back of the room. It was Dr. Evans, his face pale and his hands trembling. The crowd parted for him, people whispering and pointing as he walked past. He looked like a man walking to his own execution, but his eyes were fixed on me with a look of desperate resolve. He climbed the small steps onto the stage. I held the microphone out to him. "This is Dr. Evans," I told the crowd. "He was the first doctor to treat me at the hospital. He has something he needs to say." Dr. Evans took the microphone. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at my daughter. "I lied about your mother's condition," he said, his voice shaking but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I told you she was hopeless, that she would never recover, It wasn't true. Then he took a deep breath and delivered the final blow. I did it because your daughter Lisa forced me to. She discovered a mistake from my past and threatened to ruin my life, my career, and my family if I didn't do exactly as she said. She blackmailed me into helping her try and kill her own mother. The room was utterly silent. There was nowhere left for my daughter to run. Dr. Evans was not finished. He took another shaky breath, his eyes still locked on my daughter Lisa. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice now filled with a strange mix of medical authority and disgust. "I looked into the substance she had been giving you." He turned to the crowd. "It wasn't just a simple poison to make her sick. The compound she ordered online was specifically designed by chemists to mimic the exact symptoms of a massive, untraceable stroke. It's made to fool doctors. It's engineered to lead to a diagnosis of natural causes." A new wave of horror rippled through the ballroom. This was the fifth and final twist of my story. This wasn't a desperate act of greed. This was a cold, calculated, scientific execution plan. My daughter hadn't just tried to hurt me. She had studied how to do it perfectly. She had researched the most efficient, untraceable way to murder her own mother and get away with it completely. The little girl who I had helped with her science fair projects had grown up to use that same intelligence to plan my death, right down to the last molecule. In that moment, everyone in the room saw her for what she was, a monster. The room exploded. The polite whispers turned into loud, angry shouts. People were standing up, pointing at my children, their faces filled with rage and disgust. My daughter Lisa, finally broken, let out a wild scream. "She's lying! She's a crazy, vindictive old woman!" She tried to run, to push her way off the stage, but it was too late. My lawyer, David, gave a signal, and two large hotel security guards stepped forward, blocking her path. My son Mark simply crumpled, sinking to the floor in a sobbing heap, his hands covering his face. It was chaos. News reporters were rushing the stage, their cameras flashing like lightning. I saw the mayor's face, pale with shock. I saw old family friends staring at my children as if they were strangers. Lisa continued to scream and struggle as the guards took her arm. "You'll regret this," she shrieked at me, her face a twisted mask of pure hatred. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, a fitting soundtrack to the complete and total destruction of their lives. I just sat there in my wheelchair, watching the storm I had created, as my children were escorted out of the ballroom and toward the flashing blue and red lights. And then it was quiet. The sirens faded, the shouting reporters were gone, and the last of the shocked guests had whispered their goodbyes. The grand ballroom was a mess of half-empty glasses and trampled napkins. All that was left was me, my lawyer David, and my dear brave nurse Maria. David came over and put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Carol," he said softly. "It's over now." Maria knelt beside my wheelchair and simply took my hand, her warmth a silent comfort. It was over. The fight that had consumed me for months was finished. I had won. I had exposed their lies, protected my husband's legacy, and taken back my life. But as I looked around the empty room, I didn't feel the thrill of victory I had expected. I just felt a deep, hollow quiet. I had lost my children, the two people I had loved more than anything in the world. I was free, but I was also completely and utterly alone. David wheeled me out of the hotel into the cool night air, and for the first time in a long time, I had to ask myself a terrifying question. What on earth do I do now? That question, what do I do now, stayed with me for days. I sat in my big empty house, the silence a heavy weight. The foundation my children had created was a monument to their greed, and my first instinct was to tear it all down. But then I thought of the pain I had gone through, and I wondered how many other people were out there, trapped and silent just like I had been. A new idea began to form, a purpose. I called my lawyer, David. "The Harris Family Foundation is dead," I told him, my voice firm. "But I think we can build something better from its ashes." We changed the name. It was no longer about my family's name, but about a promise. We called it Carol's Promise. Its new mission was simple: to provide free legal help and protection for elderly people who were being abused or cheated by their own families. All of my husband's money, the money my children had tried to steal, would now be used to give a voice to the voiceless. The work was hard, setting it all up, but for the first time in years, I felt that flicker of hope again. I had found my answer. I would turn my deepest pain into a shield for others. The trial was short. With the audio recordings, the financial records, and the brave testimony from Dr. Evans, my children, Mark and Lisa, stood no chance. The jury found them guilty on all charges. I didn't go to the courthouse to watch. There was no victory in seeing my own children sent away. There was only a deep, profound sadness for the people they could have been. A few months later, I sold the big family house. It was full of too many ghosts, too many memories of a life that was now over. I bought a small sunny condo with a little balcony where I could grow tomatoes. It was quiet. It was mine. David came to visit me one afternoon, a worried look on his face. "Are you really okay, Carol?" he asked gently. I looked out the window at the blue sky and I answered him honestly for the first time. "I'm not happy, David. I don't know if I'll ever be truly happy again," I said, "but I am at peace." The war was over, the anger was gone, and the quiet was no longer heavy, it was calm. The seasons changed, and the ache in my heart slowly faded into a quiet scar. I thought my story was finally, truly over. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived. The envelope was addressed in a familiar, cheerful handwriting. It was from Maria, my dear, brave nurse, who had moved to a new city to take a better job at a bigger hospital. I smiled as I opened it, my heart feeling warm. She told me all about her new life, about how much she was learning, and how the story of what we did together gave her courage every single day. She said she thought of me often and hoped I had found the peace I deserved. I sat there in my favourite armchair, the autumn sun warming my face, and felt a sense of quiet contentment. I had survived. I had a new home, a new purpose, and I had good people like Maria and David in my life. My story had come to an end, and it was a better ending than I could have ever hoped for. I folded the letter, ready to put it away, but then I saw she had added one last little note at the very bottom of the page, a PS that she must have scribbled in right before sealing the envelope. My eyes scanned the words, and a slow smile spread across my face. It read, "P.S. Carol, you are not going to believe what I overheard at the nurses' station today.